5 Amish brothers each ordered mail-order brides. Then 5 sisters looking for love arrived. The snow is falling in the Colorado highlands when 5 weary brothers gather at the depot, waiting for their brides. The stagecoach rattles to a stop. But when the door opens, shock ripples through the crowd. It isn't 5 strangers. It's 5 sisters, bound together, carrying secrets, and sent by a desperate, widowed mother. At the farmhouse, hope flickers like lamplight, until iron hooves thunder in the night. A railroad agent arrives with papers that could strip the brothers of every acre they own. Suddenly, love and survival are tied to the same fight. The sisters pledge their hearts, but whispers of betrayal, a treaty older than the steel tracks, and soldiers at the gate threaten to tear it all apart. Now, in a valley where faith meets fire and family is tested by greed, will love and unity be strong enough to save their land, or will steel and law crush them all? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The winter wind whipped across the Colorado plains as 5 tall figures made their way through the pre-dawn darkness. Their heavy boots crunched against frozen ground while they guided their team toward the wagon. The Yoder brothers worked in practiced silence, their breath forming clouds in the bitter morning air. Eli, the eldest, kept one hand pressed against his coat pocket, feeling the precious bundle of letters within. Each envelope represented months of careful correspondence, prayers, and hope. He caught Samuel, the youngest, stealing glances at him with anxious eyes. "Be still," Eli murmured, adjusting the horse's harness. "The Lord guides our path." The wagon creaked as they climbed aboard, Jonas and Abram taking the rear while Levi huddled close to Samuel. The short journey into Pine Bluff seemed to stretch endlessly as the sun crept above the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. The little town was already stirring when they arrived. Storekeepers swept their wooden walkways, while ranch hands clustered around the saloon, stamping their feet against the cold. The Yoder brothers drew curious stares as they hitched their team near the depot. "Them Amish boys are up to something," a voice carried on the wind. "All 5 of them at once?" Abram's jaw tightened at the whispers, but Eli placed a steady hand on his shoulder. They took their places along the depot's wall, each brother lost in thought. The letters had seemed like such a sensible solution when they'd first written to the marriage agency in Denver. Their ranch needed women's touches, their home needed wives, and their hearts needed companions. The distant rumble of wheels made Samuel straighten. "The stage is coming," he whispered, voice cracking slightly. Indeed, a cloud of dust announced the approaching stagecoach. It thundered closer, the team of horses working hard against the rutted road. The brothers unconsciously moved closer together, united in their nervous anticipation. The coach lurched to a stop, and for a moment all was still. Then the door swung open. A young woman in a neat bonnet stepped down carefully, her gray dress brushing the wooden platform. She turned to assist another, similarly dressed figure. Then another emerged, and another, and finally, a 5th. 5 sisters stood before them, their cheeks pink from cold and travel, their bonnets nearly identical. A ripple of laughter spread through the watching townsfolk as understanding dawned. Eli felt his brothers shift uncertainly beside him. This was not what they had expected. Not 5 separate women, but a family group, bound together by blood and circumstance. The tallest sister stepped forward, her bearing graceful despite the journey's wear. "I am Ruth Miller," she announced, her voice clear and steady. "These are my sisters, our mother." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When she saw your advertisements, she felt led by the Lord to send us together." Jonas made a small, startled sound. Levi's eyes were wide with disbelief. Samuel seemed frozen in place. Abram's expression shifted between confusion and something like wonder. "You mean to say," Eli finally managed, "that you all replied to our letters as one family?" Ruth nodded, her hands clasped before her. "We have lost our father, and our mother believed this was God's way of providing for us all. She could not bear to see us separated." Her eyes held a quiet strength as she added, "We understand if this changes your intentions." The brothers exchanged glances, years of unspoken communication passing between them. They had prayed for guidance, for wives to help build their future. Could this unexpected answer, 5 sisters instead of 5 strangers, be the Lord's plan? The winter wind gusted around them, carrying the scent of pine from the distant mountains. The townsfolk had fallen silent, watching the tableau unfold. In that moment of suspended time, the enormity of what lay before them settled over the group like fresh snow. The sisters huddled closer together, their shoulders touching in silent support. The brothers stood rooted, their carefully laid plans scattered like leaves in the wind. Yet something else was growing in that space between them, a sense of possibility, of providence working in ways they never could have imagined. Eli felt the letters in his pocket, each one containing dreams and prayers. Perhaps these were answered prayers wearing unexpected faces. The silence stretched, heavy with questions yet unasked, and decisions yet unmade, as 10 young people stood on the threshold of a future none of them had anticipated. Inside the Pine Bluff Depot office, warmth from the pot-bellied stove pushed back the morning chill. Sheriff Porter had kindly offered them use of the space, and now 10 young people sat in a circle, steam rising from tin cups of tea between them. Ruth Miller's steady hands poured for each person, her movements precise and practiced. "Our father," she began, her voice soft but clear, "was called home to the Lord 2 winters past. The Kansas snows came early that year." She paused, touching the plain locket at her throat. Miriam, seated beside her, continued the tale. "Mother worried constantly about our futures after that. When she saw your advertisements in the newspaper." A small smile touched her lips. "Well, she wrote to the agency without telling us at first." "She arranged everything?" Eli asked, his brow furrowed beneath his broad-brimmed hat. "Yes," Esther spoke up, her gentle voice carrying the lilt of a schoolteacher. "She said the Lord had shown her a way to keep us together while securing our futures." The brothers exchanged troubled glances. Jonas set his cup down with a quiet clink. "But for kin to marry kin, even if not by blood. Is it right?" A heavy silence settled over the room, broken only by the crack and pop of burning wood in the stove. Through the window, winter sunlight cast long shadows across the wooden floor. "Perhaps," Ruth offered carefully, "you would like to know more about us? What we might bring to your home?" Abram nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That would be wise." One by one, the sisters shared their gifts. Ruth spoke of her experience managing their Kansas household after their father's death, cooking, cleaning, and keeping accounts with careful precision. Miriam's eyes brightened as she described her skill with bread and pies, how she could make meals stretch when supplies ran thin. "I taught at our district school," Esther added softly, "reading, writing, and scripture. The children—" She smiled, a hint of pride showing through. "They seemed to learn well." Naomi, who had been quietly observing, spoke of her garden knowledge. "Even in winter, I tend seedlings. Come spring, I can grow vegetables enough to feed many mouths." "And I," Rachel chimed in, her youth showing in her eagerness, "can mend anything that needs mending. My needle moves quick as prairie wind." She pulled a small sampler from her bag, showing neat, even stitches that made even Jonas lean forward with interest. As afternoon light slanted through the depot windows, a decision seemed to settle over the group like a warm blanket. Eli stood, straightening his coat. "The day grows late. Would you ladies care to see your new home?" The wagon ride to the ranch was quiet, but not uncomfortable. The sisters huddled close against the cold, while the brothers pointed out landmarks, the creek that never ran dry, the stand of pine trees that gave the town its name, the rolling pastures where cattle grazed in warmer months. Finally, they crested a small rise, and there stood the ranch house. Lamplight already glowed from its windows, thanks to Samuel riding ahead to prepare. The two-story structure was solid and well-maintained, with a broad porch and smoke curling from its chimney. Inside, the kitchen was warm and inviting. Miriam immediately moved to inspect the large cast-iron stove, while Rachel examined the neat curtains with a practiced eye. The long table that dominated the room had places set for all 10 of them. As they settled in to share their first meal together, the initial stiffness began to melt. Abram asked Miriam about her favorite bread recipes. Jonas mentioned his fiddle playing, causing Esther's eyes to light up as she spoke of hymns she had taught her students. The sound of laughter, tentative at first, then growing bolder, filled the kitchen. Ruth caught Eli's eye across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. Perhaps this unexpected arrangement wasn't so strange after all. Then came the sound of hoofbeats in the yard. The laughter died. Boots scraped on the porch, followed by a sharp knock. Eli rose to open the door, revealing Sheriff Porter's broad figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. The lawman's face was drawn with concern as he stepped inside, removing his hat. In his hand, he clutched a rolled document, its official seal gleaming in the lamplight. "Evening, folks," he said gravely. "Wish I wasn't bringing this news, especially today, but—" He held out the paper, the railroad's seal clearly visible. "The railroad's laying claim to this land. They say they had rights to it before you all ever settled here." The warmth seemed to drain from the room. 10 faces turned pale in the lamplight as the weight of his words settled over their first supper together. The brothers exchanged glances before Eli gestured toward the parlor. "Sheriff, please." His voice was steady, though his hands trembled slightly as he folded the letter. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath their boots as they moved into the fire-lit room. Ruth and her sisters gathered in the doorway, their faces drawn with concern. The flames cast dancing shadows on the wall as Sheriff Porter settled into one of the sturdy chairs, his weathered hat held loosely in his hands. "The railroad's filing ain't unexpected," Porter began, his eyes moving from brother to brother. "They've been buying up land all through the territory, but this—" He smoothed the document across his knee. "This is different. They're claiming prior rights to run a spur line straight through your valley." Jonas leaned against the mantel, his usually quiet demeanor taut with tension. "When?" "Hearing set for 3 weeks from Tuesday in town." Porter's boots scuffed against the floor as he shifted uncomfortably. "Without proper land rights, well, everything built here would be void, including any marriages performed on disputed ground." The silence that followed was heavy as iron. In the doorway, Rachel gripped Naomi's hand, while Miriam's fingers twisted in her apron. Esther stood perfectly still, her face pale in the firelight. Eli stepped forward, his shadow tall against the wall. "Our deeds are valid, Sheriff. Judge Matthews himself signed them 2 years ago when we first settled." Porter's sigh seemed to fill the room. "I know, Eli, and I'll testify to that, but—" He stood slowly, settling his hat back on his head. "Railroads don't lose. Not often, anyway. His eyes held a mixture of sympathy and resignation. I'm sorry to bring such news on what should have been a joyful day. After the sheriff's departure, the household sat in shared silence. The fire popped and hissed, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the eaves with a mournful sound. Ruth's voice, when it came, was soft but certain. "We should pray." She moved into the parlor, her sisters following like shadows. The Lord guides our paths, even when they seem dark. The sisters knelt, heads bowed, their bonnets catching the firelight. After a moment's hesitation, the brothers joined them, their deep voices blending with the women's as they recited familiar verses. The words seemed to settle something in the room, like dust after rain. When the prayers ended, Eli cleared his throat. "It's been a long day. Samuel, show the ladies to their rooms." He turned to Ruth and her sisters. "We've prepared the upstairs chambers. They're small, but clean." Samuel led the way up the narrow stairs, carrying a lamp. The guest rooms were indeed small but neat, with quilts folded carefully on each bed. The sisters whispered quiet goodnights, disappearing one by one behind closed doors. The brothers made their way to the bunkhouse, their boots crunching on the frozen ground. The building was solid but plain, with row of narrow beds along each wall. They settled in without speaking, though none seemed ready for sleep. Jonas waited until the others had grown still before slipping out into the night. The stars wheeled overhead, sharp and bright in the winter sky, as he walked the fence line. His lips moved in silent prayer, reciting passages that spoke of faith in times of trial. Meanwhile, in the main house's kitchen, Ruth had crept back downstairs. She stirred the dying embers in the stove, watching the sparks swirl upward. Doubt crept in like the cold draft under the door. Had they made a terrible mistake, coming all this way? What would become of them if the railroad took everything? She touched her father's Bible in her apron pocket, drawing comfort from its familiar shape. Whatever came, they would face it together. That much, at least, was certain. The night deepened, stars wheeling overhead. In the bunkhouse, the brothers shifted restlessly on their narrow beds, minds turning over possibilities and prayers. In the main house, 5 sisters dreamed uneasy dreams beneath borrowed quilts. When morning came, it arrived on silent feet. The first hint was a gradual lightening of the sky, then the soft touch of something cold and wet against the window panes. Snowflakes drifted down, small and tentative at first, then growing thicker. World outside turned quiet and white, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what the new day would bring. The land that had drawn them all here, brothers and sisters alike, lay beneath the growing blanket of snow, its fate now as uncertain as their own. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the snow-dusted valley in shades of pink and gold. The kitchen stove already radiated warmth as Ruth stirred the morning's porridge. Her sisters moved purposefully around her, eager to prove their worth. "We won't sit idle while there's work to be done," Miriam declared, rolling up her sleeves. She found Abram in the pantry, measuring flour for the day's bread. His eyebrows rose as she reached for the mixing bowl. "You needn't trouble yourself," he started, but Miriam shook her head, a determined smile on her face. "I've baked since I was tall enough to reach the table," she said, expertly measuring yeast. Soon, they worked side by side, their hands moving in rhythm as they kneaded the dough. Flour dusted Miriam's sleeves, and a bit had settled in her hair, making Abram's heart skip when she laughed. Outside, Samuel led Naomi to the goat pen. "They can be ornery," he warned, but Naomi simply smiled, approaching the nearest nanny with confident hands. "Hello, sweet one," she murmured. And to Samuel's amazement, the usually stubborn goat stood quietly as Naomi began milking. Her movements were quick and sure, the milk streaming steadily into the pail. "You've done this before," Samuel said, admiration clear in his voice. "Every morning since I was 12, Naomi replied softly. "Animals know when you respect them." The morning air filled with the sounds of work. Esther's broom swept the porch with steady strokes, while Rachel's cheerful humming accompanied the snap of linens as she hung them on the line. The brothers paused in their own tasks, watching with growing appreciation as the sisters transformed their bachelor household with efficient grace. By midday, savory stew bubbles filled the kitchen. The family gathered around the long table, passing bread still warm from the oven. Ruth waited until bowls were filled before clearing her throat. "We need to speak about the railroad," she said, her voice gentle but firm. All eyes turned to her as she continued. "Scripture tells us a house divided cannot stand. We must join forces if we're to save this land." Eli set down his spoon, studying Ruth's earnest face. The silence stretched until finally he nodded. "You speak truth," he admitted. "Together we stand stronger." Relief softened Ruth's features. "Then we'll face this as one family," she said, reaching for the bread basket. "Pass the butter, please, Jonas." The afternoon passed in shared labor. As dusk approached, Jonas retrieved his fiddle from its case. Rachel's eyes lit up at the sight of it, and soon the parlor filled with music. Jonas played an old hymn, his deep voice joining Rachel's clear soprano. One by one, the others gathered, adding their voices to the harmony. The peaceful moment shattered at a sharp knock. Eli opened the door to find a messenger on horseback, breath steaming in the cold air. He handed over a telegram before spurring his mount back toward town. Eli's face grew grave as he read the message aloud. "Survey crew arriving. Prepare to vacate." The music died. Rachel's hand found Naomi's. Esther's shoulders straightened. Miriam moved closer to Abram, while Samuel seemed to grow taller, standing protectively near Naomi. Ruth rose quietly, lifting the kettle to the stove. "Then we must stand firmer still," she said, her voice steady despite its softness. "God did not lead us here to abandon us now." Outside, the wind picked up, driving snow in thick swirls past the windows. The storm that had threatened all day was finally breaking. But inside, none moved to seek their beds. Instead, they drew closer to the fire, shoulder to shoulder, brothers and sisters united in their determination. Eli watched as Ruth poured tea into cups, passing them around the circle. Her quiet strength steadied him, just as Miriam's practical cheer seemed to calm Abram's restless spirit. Jonas and Rachel shared a hymnal, while Esther showed Samuel a better way to hold his cup to keep the heat longer. Naomi tended the fire, adding logs with careful precision. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Snow blanketed the yard and gathered on the fence rails, transforming their world into something both beautiful and challenging. But within the warmth of the parlor, a new kind of family was forming, one bound not just by future marriages, but by shared purpose and faith. They sat together as the evening deepened, their silence comfortable now, broken only by quiet conversation and the occasional hymn. The telegram lay forgotten on the table, its threat diminished by their unity. Whatever the railroad might bring, they would face it together, their strength multiplied by trust in each other and in God's guidance. A week of heavy snowfall transformed the Yoder homestead into an island of warmth amid the white wilderness. Inside the farmhouse, life took on a new rhythm, one filled with the bustle of 10 souls learning to live as family. In the corner by the parlor window, Rachel sat cross-legged on a cushioned chair, her nimble fingers working through a basket of socks that needed mending. Levi settled beside her, a worn Bible open in his hands. His quiet voice carried through the room as he guided her finger across the verses of Psalms. "Sound it out slowly," he encouraged, watching her brow furrow in concentration. "The Lord is my shepherd," Rachel read carefully, a proud smile lighting her face when Levi nodded. "I shall not want." Their lesson paused at a burst of laughter from the kitchen. Miriam stood at the work table, her apron and face dusted white with flour, while Abram tried unsuccessfully to suppress his chuckling. A bag of flour lay tipped on its side. Between them, its contents scattered across the floor like fresh snow. "I told you the bag had a tear," Miriam scolded, but her eyes danced with mirth. She reached up to brush flour from Abram's beard, her touch lingering for just a moment. "Reckon I should have listened," Abram admitted, catching her hand in his. Together they began sweeping up the mess, their shared glances speaking volumes more than words. The afternoon brought visitors, 3 children from the Henderson place 2 miles over, their cheeks red from the cold. Esther welcomed them with warm smiles and hot cocoa, setting up a makeshift classroom near the kitchen stove. The scratch of chalk on slate mingled with the children's voices as they worked through their sums. "Now then," Esther said, holding up her slate, "if Farmer Brown has 12 sheep, and each sheep gives 3 pounds of wool." Her gentle teaching style soon had the children fully engaged, their earlier shivers forgotten in the warmth of learning. As dusk approached and the children headed home, the household settled into evening routines. Ruth found Eli in the barn, checking on the livestock one last time by lantern light. Steam rose from the animal's breath in the cold air as Eli moved between the stalls, his movements efficient but troubled. "Something weighs on your mind," Ruth observed softly, drawing closer. Eli paused, his hand resting on a post. "I question if I understand God's plan anymore," he confessed. "Our land, our future, all seems uncertain now." Ruth stepped beside him, her own fears rising to the surface. "I wake nights wondering if I've led my sisters into hardship," she whispered. "They trust me to guide them right, but this path grows darker by the day." In the lantern's glow, their eyes met. Ruth reached out, taking Eli's weathered hand in hers. "Yet Providence may yet show us the way," she said. "We must trust in more than what our eyes can see." The intimate moment shattered at the sharp crack of a rifle in the distance. They rushed outside, boots crunching in the deep snow. Other doors banged open as the rest of the family spilled out into the yard. There, stark against the white expanse near their irrigation ditch, stood a line of wooden stakes, their red-painted tops marking the railroad's intended path across their land. Abram's face darkened with fury as he strode forward, fists clenched. "Abram, no," Eli commanded, catching his brother's arm. "Violence will only strengthen their claim against us." Ruth moved past them both, her skirts brushing through the snow. Without a word, she bent and wrapped her fingers around the nearest stake. With one firm pull, she freed it from the frozen ground. Walking to the fire pit, she tossed the stake in among the ashes. The others watched in silence as Ruth straightened, snow catching in her bonnet strings. The wind picked up, driving fresh flurries across the yard. Within minutes, the holes left by the survey stakes began filling with snow, erasing all trace of the railroad's intrusion. "Come inside, all of you," Ruth called, her voice carrying over the rising wind. "The night grows cold." One by one, they returned to the warmth of the house. Miriam slipped her arm through Abram's, gentling his anger. Rachel gathered close to Levi, while Esther stoked the fire higher. The wind sang around the eaves as snow continued to fall, but inside, The family drew together, their bonds strengthening against the gathering storm. The morning sun broke through thinning clouds, turning the blanket of snow into a dazzling white expanse. Eli studied the brightening sky, noting how the storm's fury had finally spent itself. "Time to gather firewood," he announced to his brothers. "The weather's giving us a chance." To their surprise, Ruth spoke up from the doorway. "We'll come along," she said, her sisters nodding behind her. "Many hands make light work." Jonas raised an eyebrow. "It'll be mighty cold in the wagon." "We've brought quilts," Miriam answered, holding up several thick coverlets stitched in deep reds and blues. "And we can help stack the wood." The brothers exchanged glances, then Eli nodded. "Much obliged for the help." Soon the wagon creaked through the snow, pulled by their sturdy team. The sisters huddled together under the quilts, while the brothers took turns walking alongside, their boots crunching in the fresh powder. The path to town wound past stark winter trees, their branches etched black against the pale sky. As they approached Pine Bluff, Rachel spotted a familiar figure near the church. "Look, it's Reverend Halstead." The circuit preacher stood outside the whitewashed building, adjusting the notice board. He turned at the sound of their wagon, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "The Lord provides good timing," he called out. "I'd hoped to speak with you all." Eli drew the team to a halt. The group gathered around Reverend Halstead, who studied their faces with kind concern. "I've heard about your trouble with the railroad," he said. "Been praying on it." "We have the deeds," Eli explained, "signed proper by Judge Wilson himself." The Reverend nodded thoughtfully. "Legal standing needs more than paper, though. A community's testimony of worth carries weight with the territorial court. How you've helped neighbors, taught children, shared in times of need, these things matter." Ruth's eyes brightened. "A petition," she said suddenly. "We could gather signatures from townspeople who know the good this land does under proper stewardship." "The Lord works through many hands," Reverend Halstead agreed, smiling at her insight. The sisters exchanged determined looks. "We'll split up," Ruth decided. "Cover more ground that way." They moved through town with purpose. Ruth and Miriam visited the general store, where Mr. Peterson readily signed, remembering how the Yoder brothers had helped rebuild his loading dock last spring. Esther found the schoolteacher, Miss I. Jenkins, resting her head in her hands at her desk. The weary woman brightened at Esther's offer to continue helping with the younger students. "Of course I'll sign," Miss Jenkins said, reaching for her pen. "Your teaching has been a blessing." Rachel and Naomi stopped at the bakery, where Mrs. Schmidt added her name while pressing fresh rolls into their hands. "For your trouble," she insisted, "your family's honey makes my best recipes possible." By late afternoon, the petition held 24 signatures. The group reunited at the church as the sun lowered, joining other families for Sunday service. The simple building filled with the sound of hymns, the sisters' clear voices weaving with the brothers' deeper tones. The familiar melodies carried their hopes skyward, plain Amish faith finding harmony with frontier determination. As the congregation filed out into the purple dusk, a tall figure waited by the hitching post. The man's fine coat and polished boots marked him as a stranger to ranch work. He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Mr. Yoder," he said smoothly, "I'm Cartwright, representing the railroad's interests." Eli stood straighter, conscious of Ruth stepping closer to his side. "We aim to keep our land, Mr. Cartwright." The agent's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sentiment is touching, but steel and law tell a different tale. The railroad hasn't lost a claim yet." He touched his hat brim again. "Good evening to you all." They watched him stride away, his boots leaving sharp prints in the snow. The ride home was quiet, each lost in thought until Samuel spoke up from the back of the wagon. "Smell that? Someone's been cooking." Indeed, savory aromas drifted from the kitchen. Before leaving town, Abram had quietly purchased a plump chicken from the mercantile. Now Miriam and Naomi worked together at the stove, seasoning the roasting bird with herbs dried from their summer garden. The family gathered around the long table, heads bowed for grace. When Eli finished the prayer, Ruth began passing platters of golden roast chicken, steaming potatoes, and fresh bread. For a moment, there was only the happy clatter of plates and murmured thanks. Then Rachel, reaching for the salt, knocked over Jonas's water cup. Instead of scolding, Jonas laughed, mopping up the spill with his napkin. Soon others joined in, the tension of the day breaking like ice in spring. Stories and jokes flowed freely, sisters and brothers no longer strangers but family finding their way. Lamplight gleamed on smiling faces as they shared this simple feast, the warmth of their laughter pushing back the winter cold and the shadow of Cartwright's threats. For these precious hours, they were simply a family, breaking bread together in their home. The days grew shorter and colder as winter tightened its grip on the valley. Each morning brought new challenges that bound the family closer together. Eli and his brothers spent hours chopping thick sheets of ice from the Hoh Creek, ensuring their livestock had water. The sharp crack of their axes echoed across the snow-covered fields, punctuated by the scrape of metal against frozen water. Inside the farmhouse, Ruth and her sisters maintained a constant battle against the cold, banking fires and hanging extra quilts over windows. The barn needed constant attention, too. Gaps in the wooden walls required patching, and hay needed careful rationing to last until spring. As evening fell each day, the family gathered in the warm kitchen. Esther had set up a makeshift school area near the stove, where she patiently guided Samuel through his reading lessons. His finger traced each word carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The Lord is my shepherd," Samuel read slowly, pride crossing his face as he completed the verse without stumbling. "Very good," Esther encouraged, her gentle smile warming the room more than the stove. "You're improving every day." Near the window, Naomi tended to her collection of clay pots, each holding precious seedlings. She had arranged them carefully to catch what sunlight filtered through the frosted glass. Tiny green shoots pushed up through the dark soil, tomatoes, herbs, and flowers that promised spring's return. "These will be ready for planting when the ground thaws," she explained to Ruth, who watched her sister's careful ministrations. "We'll have fresh vegetables before most folks even start their gardens." One evening, as Jonas led the family in scripture reading, a knock interrupted the peaceful scene. The sound seemed to echo in the quiet house. Eli rose to answer, surprised to find Henry Gray Hawk, the respected Ute elder, standing in the doorway. Snow dusted his shoulders and the wooden staff he leaned upon. "Please, come in from the cold," Ruth said, quickly pulling out a chair near the fire. The elder moved with deliberate grace, his weathered face grave but kind. He waited until the family gathered around him before speaking. "I have watched your ways," he said, his voice deep and measured. "You tend the land with respect, use water with wisdom." He gestured toward the window where darkness had fallen. "That irrigation ditch you rely upon. My people dug it when my grandfather was young, long before iron horses dreamed of crossing these lands." From within his coat, Henry Greyhawk withdrew a folded document, yellowed with age but carefully preserved. "Water remembers," he said, spreading the paper on the table, "and paper remembers too. Here is the treaty that speaks of our water rights in this valley, rights that were passed to those who came after, if they worked the land with honor." Eli leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly as he studied the document. There, clear despite its age, was an official treaty seal from the territorial government, dated decades earlier. Ruth moved closer, her shoulder brushing against his as she read. "This proves the water claim predates any railroad grant," she whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. Eli looked up at Henry Greyhawk, tears threatening to spill. "Why would you help us?" The elder's eyes crinkled slightly. "Because you listen to the land, like my people did. The railroad men, they see only what they can take. But water remembers those who respect it." Ruth reached across the table and clasped the elder's hand, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. We're more grateful than words can say." After Henry Greyhawk departed, the family gathered in a tight circle for prayer. Jonas's deep voice led them, thanking the Creator for sending help through unexpected channels. Abram's arm wrapped around Miriam's shoulders. Samuel held Naomi's hand. Through the windows they could see snow falling steady and thick, but inside the farmhouse, their hearts burned bright with renewed hope. The old treaty represented more than just a legal claim. It was a bridge between peoples, a recognition that the land itself held memories deeper than any railroad's ambitions. As they finished their prayers, the family remained together, listening to the comfortable crackle of the fire and the soft hiss of falling snow, united in their gratitude and strengthened in their resolve. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Frost sparkled on the wagon seat as the brothers hitched their team before sunrise. Ruth and Miriam climbed aboard, wrapped in thick quilts against the biting cold. The wagon wheels creaked over the frozen ground as they set out for Pine Bluff, the precious treaty document tucked safely in Eli's coat. The sun was just climbing over the eastern hills when they reached town. Already folks were stirring, storekeepers sweeping their boardwalks, women carrying water buckets, a boy lighting the lamps at the telegraph office. The brothers' wagon drew curious glances as it rattled down the main street toward the sheriff's office. Sheriff Porter was at his desk when they entered, coffee mug steaming beside a stack of wanted posters. He looked up, his weathered face revealing nothing as Eli carefully unfolded the treaty document. "Water rights from the territorial days," Eli explained, spreading the yellowed paper before him. "The Ute people's claim predates any railroad grant." The sheriff studied the document, rubbing his chin. Minutes ticked by on the wall clock while Ruth and her sisters held their breath. Finally, Porter sighed and reached for his official ledger. "I reckon this needs to be part of the hearing record," he said slowly. "Can't ignore a treaty seal, even an old one." He carefully recorded the document's details, though his hand seemed heavy with reluctance. Word spread quickly through Pine Bluff. As the family walked down the boardwalk, they noticed railroad men gathered outside the telegraph office, their dark suits and scowling faces stark against the morning light. But for every hostile glare, there were nods of approval from townspeople. The baker tipping his hat, the schoolteacher smiling warmly, the blacksmith raising his hammer in greeting. At noon, they stopped at Hendrick's General Store. Rachel and Levi lingered by the candy jars, their heads bent close together as Rachel told a story that had Levi fighting to hide his smile. Her laughter rang clear as bells through the store, drawing indulgent looks from other customers. Old Mr. Hendrick himself shuffled over, his apron dusted with flour. "Your credit is good here," he declared, looking straight at Eli. "Folks who stand for justice should not lack bread." He began piling supplies on the counter: coffee, sugar, salt pork, even precious lamp oil. "We can't accept," Eli started, but Hendrick waved him quiet. "You can, and you will," the shopkeeper insisted. "Community means standing together." Miriam quietly added several cups of dried apples to their order, catching Hendrick's eye with a conspiratorial smile. He nodded, understanding her unspoken request. The journey home was easier, the morning's bitter cold giving way to bright sunshine that melted patches of snow along the road. Hope seemed to ride with them, light as the clouds scudding across the winter-blue sky. That evening, while the brothers tended to the evening chores, Miriam worked quietly in the kitchen. She had traded some of their precious flour for Hendrik's dried apples, and now the familiar scent of cinnamon and butter filled the house. When Abram came in from the barn, stamping snow from his boots, she was just pulling 2 golden brown pies from the oven. "What's this?" he asked, his face flushing as she set them on the windowsill to cool. "Apple pie," she answered simply, but her eyes danced. "I thought we could all use something sweet today." Abram ducked his head, unused to such thoughtful gestures. "Much obliged," he mumbled, but his smile was warm as summer. They gathered around the kitchen table, lantern light casting a gentle glow as they shared the still warm pie. For a precious moment, peace settled over the household like a comfortable blanket. Ruth's hand found Eli's beneath the table. Rachel hummed softly as she gathered plates. Samuel told a story about a stubborn goat that had them all chuckling. Then came the thunder of hooves in the yard. Eli reached the door first, opening it to find young Tom Wesley from the telegraph office, his horse blowing steam in the cold air. "Had to ride out straight away," Tom gasped, holding out a crumpled paper. "Cartwright sent wires to Denver. He's calling in soldiers to enforce the railroad's claim." The boy's face was grim in the lamplight. "Says water rights don't matter none when it comes to progress. They're talking about bringing a whole company of troops." The warmth of their evening celebration drained away like water through sand. Abram's fists clenched at his sides, while Ruth instinctively drew her sisters closer. Through the window, they could see the last light fading from the western sky, as if even the day itself was retreating before this new threat. Fear crept through the farmhouse, like winter frost. The sisters gathered in the kitchen that evening, their faces drawn with worry as they discussed their options. Miriam wrung her hands as she paced near the stove. "Perhaps we should return to Kansas," she whispered, "before the soldiers force us out." Rachel clutched her sister's arm. "But we just got here. We can't give up everything we've built." Esther nodded solemnly. "The connections we've made, the life we're creating. Running now would only invite defeat." Eli's steady voice cut through their discussion. He stood in the doorway, shoulders square despite the weight of worry visible in his eyes. "If we flee, we lose all hope of keeping what's rightfully ours." Ruth rose from her chair, crossing to stand beside him. "Remember what the good book tells us," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "The Lord is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble." The sisters exchanged glances, drawing strength from Ruth's unwavering faith. Even as doubt lingered, they nodded, accepting the decision to stay and face whatever came. Days passed with grinding tension. The soldiers made camp at the edge of town, their presence a constant shadow over daily life. Each night, torchlight from their camp glowed in the distance like malevolent stars, a reminder of the threat hanging over the homestead. Yet life continued its steady rhythm. Naomi refused to let fear silence her joy, singing old hymns as she worked at the spinning wheel, turning wool into yarn. Her clear voice lifted through the house, offering comfort to worried hearts. In the barn, Samuel struggled with a stubborn saddle, his frustration evident in every movement. Rachel leaned against the stall door, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "You're doing it backward," she teased. "The cinch goes under the belly, not over the back." Samuel flushed red, but couldn't help grinning. "I reckon I knew that," he muttered, adjusting his grip. "Oh, you reckon so?" Rachel laughed, stepping forward to help. Together they managed to properly saddle the horse, their shared accomplishment brightening the worried atmosphere. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Jonas took out his fiddle. He settled in his chair by the hearth, bow hovering over strings, as if gathering courage. Then he began to play, a gentle tune that spoke of home and hope and faith. Esther sat nearby, her mending forgotten in her lap as she hummed harmony. The firelight caught in her eyes as she watched Jonas play, their shared music weaving a moment of peace in troubled times. The peaceful interlude shattered with the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Cartwright rode up to the fence line, flanked by 4 soldiers on horseback. Their uniforms gleamed dully in the fading light as they reined to a halt. Eli strode out to meet them, the treaty document clutched in his hand. Ruth and her sisters gathered on the porch, while the brothers spread out behind Eli, tension visible in every line of their bodies. "This ends now," Cartwright announced, his voice cold as steel. "You will vacate these premises immediately." "We have legal right to this land," Eli replied steadily, holding up the treaty. "This document proves—" "That worthless paper?" Cartwright's laugh cut like a knife. "It's nothing but dust and lies. Progress won't be stopped by some ancient scribbles." Abram surged forward, fists clenched, but Ruth moved faster. She stepped between the men, her plain dress and bonnet a stark contrast to Cartwright's fine suit and the soldiers' uniforms. "The Lord defends truth," she declared, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "No amount of force can change what is right." Cartwright's face darkened with anger. He wheeled his horse sharply, making the animal dance sideways. "You have until week's end," he spat. "After that, we remove you by whatever means necessary." He spurred his horse, the soldiers falling in behind him as they rode away. The family watched until the riders disappeared into the gathering dusk. Abram's hands were still clenched, his jaw tight with suppressed rage. Eli placed a steadying hand on his brother's shoulder, while Ruth gathered her sisters close. "What do we do now?" Samuel asked, his young voice trembling slightly. "We pray," Ruth answered firmly, "and we trust that the Lord will make a way." The evening shadows lengthened across the yard as they stood together, their resolve strengthening even as darkness fell. In the distance, torchlight from the soldiers' camp flickered like a waiting threat. Dawn brought purposeful activity to the homestead. In the parlor, Eli sat at the wooden desk, carefully drafting testimony for the upcoming hearing. His quill scratched steadily across paper as he detailed their land improvements and community contributions. Nearby, Ruth composed passionate appeals to the territorial governor, her neat script filling page after page with reasoned arguments for justice. "We must show them our worth extends beyond mere property," she murmured, glancing up to meet Eli's eyes. He nodded, understanding her wisdom. In the kitchen, the sisters worked with swift fingers, stitching heavy winter garments. Miriam guided Rachel's needle through thick wool, while Esther reinforced coat seams with sturdy thread. The approaching hearing would require long hours in town, exposed to bitter winter winds. "Make the stitches smaller there," Miriam instructed, pointing to Rachel's work. "It'll keep the wind out better." Outside, axe blows rang through the crisp air as the brothers chopped wood. They would need plenty for the journey to town and back. Samuel's younger arms tired quickly, but Abram and Jonas kept steady rhythm, the wood pile growing with each passing hour. The next morning brought unexpected warmth, the snow melting into patches of mud and grass. Word spread quickly through the valley. The Millers needed help raising their new barn. By mid-morning, wagons rolled in from all directions, carrying families eager to help. The sisters packed baskets of bread and dried apple pies, while the brothers gathered tools. At the Miller farm, the scene buzzed with activity. Men positioned massive timber beams while women organized a meal line. Children darted between adults, carrying water and tools. The sound of hammers filled the air, punctuated by shouts of encouragement and bursts of laughter. Henry Gray Hawk arrived with several Ute families, their knowledge of local building techniques proving invaluable. As they worked alongside the Amish and settlers, stories flowed of shared hardships and mutual aid in harsh times. "My grandfather helped raise first barn in this valley," Greyhawk told Eli as they secured a crossbeam. "Good to see people still lifting together." Hymns rose spontaneously as the work continued. Esther's clear voice led, "Praise God from whom all blessings flow," the melody carrying across the valley. Other voices joined, Amish, settler, and native, creating a harmony as sturdy as the barn itself. By late afternoon, the barn stood proud against the sky. Lanterns were hung from the new beams, casting warm light as shadows lengthened. Jonas retrieved his fiddle, and soon music filled the fresh-built space. Couples gathered in the sweet-smelling hay of the loft, dancing with gentle steps. Esther stood near the edge, watching others dance until Jonas approached. He offered his hand without words, his shy smile speaking volumes. She accepted, and they moved carefully together, her plain skirts swishing in time with his careful steps. Nearby, Abram twirled Miriam with more enthusiasm than skill, their shared laughter ringing out when he nearly stumbled. "You're supposed to lead with your left foot," she teased, steadying him with familiar ease. Ruth found herself next to Eli, their shoulders barely touching as they watched the dancers. "See how fear eases when people come together?" she whispered. "The Lord works through fellowship." Eli's hand found hers in the shadows. "Yah, you speak truth," he murmured. "Together, we stand stronger." The stars emerged one by one as the families loaded their wagons for home. The night air carried a hint of frost, wagon wheels crunching over frozen mud. Ruth huddled close to her sisters under shared blankets, their hearts still warm from the day's joy. As their wagon crested the final hill toward home, Abram suddenly pulled the horses to a halt. Ahead, torchlight flickered at their gate. Several soldiers stood posted, their rifles gleaming dully in the darkness. The warmth of the barn raising fled, replaced by cold reality. "They mean to intimidate us," Eli said quietly, his hand tightening on the reins. Ruth reached forward to touch his arm. "Then we must show them our strength lies in more than numbers." The wagon moved forward slowly, every creak and jingle seeming too loud in the tense silence. When us soldiers watched without movement as the family passed through their own gate, returning to a home that no longer felt quite as safe. Jonas quietly steadied the nervous horses, while Abram helped the sisters down from the wagon. They hurried inside, the evening's joy now overshadowed by the watchful eyes at their gate. Through the window, torchlight continued to flicker, a constant reminder of the struggle yet to come. Morning dawned gray and heavy over the homestead. The soldiers' presence cast a dark pall across the yard, their boots leaving tracks in the fresh snow. Inside, an uneasy silence filled the house, broken only by the steady rhythm of hammering as Jonas and Abram worked to board up the most vulnerable windows. "Pass me another nail," Jonas murmured, his breath visible in the cold air. Abram handed him the iron spike, their movements careful and deliberate. The rough pine boards covered the glass panes like shields, transforming their warm home into something that felt more like a fortress. Ruth watched from the kitchen as neighboring families arrived to collect their children who usually came for Esther's lessons. Mothers hugged their little ones close, exchanging worried glances with the sisters. "We're sorry to go," whispered Mrs. Hanson, clutching her daughter's hand. "But with soldiers about..." "You're doing right by your young ones," Ruth assured her, though her heart ached at the sight of their departure. The classroom corner, usually bright with children's voices, fell silent. Near midday, hoofbeats announced Reverend Halstead's arrival. The old preacher dismounted stiffly, nodding to the soldiers as he passed. Inside the parlor, the family gathered around him, drawing strength from his weathered calm. "The Lord tests our hearts in times of trouble," he began, his voice steady and sure. "But remember, stand firm in faith, not in violence. Your strength lies in righteousness, not force." They bowed heads together as he prayed, his words rising like smoke to the rafters. "Grant us wisdom, Lord, to seek justice with clean hands and pure hearts." As evening approached, Ruth found Eli alone in the kitchen. Without speaking, they knelt together on the worn floorboards. Their prayers mingled in the dim light, asking for deliverance, for protection, for guidance through the darkness ahead. "Show us your path," Eli whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Ruth's hand found his, their fingers intertwining as they prayed. Upstairs, the sisters huddled in their shared room. Rachel's voice trembled as she spoke. "What if they force us out?" "Then we go together," Miriam declared firmly, though her own hands shook as she braided Naomi's hair. "We came as one family. We'll stay as one family." "God brought us here for purpose," Esther added softly. "We must trust in that." Outside, snow began falling heavily, the thick flakes muffling the sound of horses shifting in the soldiers' camp. The white blanket covered everything. Fence, posts, wagon tracks, the scars of survey stakes. In silent white. Morning light had barely touched the eastern sky when horse hooves thundered into the yard. Cartwright's voice rang out, sharp with anger. The family gathered at the door as he stormed up the path, Sheriff Porter following more slowly behind. "This charade ends now." Cartwright thrust a rolled map toward Eli. The paper crackled as he spread it, revealing survey lines drawn in precise ink. "This land is marked for progress. Your presence here is illegal." Eli stood straight, reaching into his coat to withdraw the carefully preserved treaty. "We have older claim," he stated quietly. "The water rights were established generations ago." "That worthless paper?" Cartwright sneered. "Written for savages who—" "Those savages were here first," Ruth interrupted, her voice firm. "Their rights stand in law as surely as any other." The argument grew heated. Cartwright's face reddened as he jabbed his finger at the survey map. Abram stepped forward, fists clenched, but Jonas held him back. Samuel and the younger sisters watched wide-eyed from the doorway. Finally, Sheriff Porter raised his hands. "Enough!" His voice cut through the tension like a knife. "This can't be settled here. It needs proper hearing in town court, with witnesses and evidence presented proper." "The railroad won't stand for—" Cartwright began. "The railroad," Porter interrupted firmly, "must follow the law same as anyone. We'll convene next week. Both sides will have their say." Cartwright's face twisted with fury, but he could not counter the sheriff's authority. He spun on his heel, coat flaring as he stormed to his horse. The sound of his departure scattered snow from the trees. That evening, exhaustion settled over the household like a heavy blanket. They gathered close around the hearth, sharing bowls of thin potato broth, all they could manage with supplies running low. The fire popped and crackled, casting dancing shadows on tired faces. Samuel cleared his throat and opened their worn Bible. His young voice grew stronger as he read, "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea." Psalm 46 filled the room with ancient comfort. Ruth watched as tension eased from Eli's shoulders. Miriam's hands steadied as she mended. even Rachel's anxious fidgeting stilled. The words wrapped around them like a warm embrace, steadying every trembling heart. The morning of the hearing broke crystal clear, the sun painting the snow-covered valley in shades of gold and rose. Before dawn, the Yoder brothers and Miller sisters had risen to complete their chores, their movements quick and purposeful in the biting cold. The weathered wagon wheels creaked as they loaded blankets and provisions for the journey into Pine Bluff. "The Lord goes before us," Ruth whispered, helping Esther climb aboard. Her words formed small clouds in the frozen air. As they approached town, other wagons joined them on the rutted road. Farmers, shopkeepers, and homesteaders nodded in greeting, their own breath rising like smoke in the winter morning. The courthouse, a modest wooden building with tall windows, stood waiting. Inside, oil lamps cast flickering shadows on rough-hewn walls. The room filled quickly with townsfolk, their boots thumping on wooden floors, coats rustling as they found seats on the hard benches. Sheriff Porter stood near the door, his badge catching the lamplight. Judge Harrison entered, his black robes sweeping as he took his place behind the elevated desk. The room fell silent, save for the occasional cough or creak of wood. "Court is now in session," he announced, voice carrying to the farthest corner. Cartwright rose first, his suit pressed and gleaming. He approached the bench with practiced ease, spreading maps and documents with flourish. "Your Honor, the railroad's claim is clear and legally binding." His words flowed smooth as honey as he detailed survey lines and development plans. Progress cannot be impeded by sentiment or superstition. Henry Gray Hawk stood next, his dignified presence commanding attention. Age lined his face, but his eyes burned bright as he produced the yellowed treaty. "Water remembers," he began, his voice deep and measured. "Before steel rails, before wooden fences, the people of this valley dug channels for life to flow." He recounted how his ancestors had worked the land, how treaties were signed in good faith, how water rights passed through generations. Murmurs rippled through the courthouse, like wind through prairie grass. Judge Harrison leaned forward, examining the treaty's faded seal with careful attention. Eli Yoder spoke next, his plain black coat stark against the polished rail. "We seek only to work the land honestly, to raise our families in faith." His words, though simple, rang with truth. 5 brothers and 5 sisters brought together by God's hand, building a home where there was wilderness. Ruth's heart swelled as she stepped forward to testify. Her clear voice carried to every corner as she described their daily labors. The gardens planted, the children taught, the bonds formed with neighbors. "This valley has become more than land to us," she said. "It has become community." One by one, townsfolk rose to speak. The baker told of bread shared in hard times. The schoolteacher praised Esther's work with children. Farmers testified to irrigation rights long established. Even the telegraph operator stood, confirming dates that proved the railroad's surveys false. Judge Harrison retired to his chambers as a winter light slanted through the windows. The wait seemed endless. Rachel clutched Naomi's hand. Jonas muttered scripture under his breath. Cartwright paced near the rear door, his polished boots clicking on wooden boards. When the judge returned, his face was solemn. The room held its breath as he lifted his gavel. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, this court finds the original treaty binding and valid. The water rights established therein take precedence over later claims. The railroad survey is hereby rejected, and all claims to this land are voided." The gavel struck with finality. For a heartbeat, silence held. Then joy erupted. Cheers filled the courthouse, hats flew into the air, and tears flowed freely. Ruth found herself swept into Eli's embrace as Miriam and Abram hugged nearby. Samuel lifted Rachel clear off her feet in celebration. Outside, sunshine transformed the snow into a field of diamonds. Families embraced on the courthouse steps, their laughter rising like prayer to the crystal sky. Under the sheriff's stern watch, soldiers began packing their camp, their wagons soon rolling east out of the valley. Henry Greyhawk approached the gathered families, his staff marking the snow. "Water remembers," he said again, smiling, "and now so shall we all." The sisters and brothers stood together, watching soldiers disappear over the eastern ridge. For the first time in months, the valley felt truly theirs, not just in paper and law, but in the deeper rights of love and labor. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across unmarked snow, the land pristine and full of promise. "Let us give thanks," Eli said softly, and they bowed their heads there on the courthouse steps, their gratitude rising silent and pure as the winter light around them. The farmhouse buzzed with activity in the days following the hearing. Relief and joy filled every corner as preparations for the 5 weddings began in earnest. Rachel and Naomi spread quilting frames near the windows, their needles flashing in winter sunlight as they stitched elaborate patterns. The sweet scent of baking bread wafted from the kitchen, where Miriam taught the younger neighbor girls to knead dough properly. Outside, Samuel and Levi gathered evergreen boughs, their arms full of fragrant pine and cedar. Esther wove the branches into graceful garlands, humming hymns as she worked. The decorations soon adorned every doorway and beam, transforming the simple home into a place of celebration. Neighbors arrived daily, bearing food and helping hands. Women gathered in the kitchen, sharing recipes and wisdom. Men worked in the barn, preparing space for the wedding feast. Children darted between adults, carrying messages and stealing cookie scraps. When Reverend Halstead visited to discuss the ceremony, his eyes crinkled with joy. "5 weddings at once, surely a blessing from above," he said, agreeing to marry all the couples together. The wedding day dawned clear and cold. Inside the crowded house, voices lifted in song as the ceremonies began. Eli and Ruth stepped forward first, their quiet strength setting the tone. Ruth's eyes shone as they exchanged vows, her hand steady in Eli's grasp. Abram and Miriam followed, their joy bubbling over, in shared laughter as they spoke their promises. Jonas and Esther clasped hands tightly, their soft words carrying clearly in the hushed room. Levi and Rachel blushed deeply, but stood tall, while Samuel and Naomi's steady gazes never wavered as they pledged their lives to each other. Outside, snow fell in gentle flakes as the church bells rang across the valley. The celebration moved to the barn, where hundreds of lanterns transformed the space into a glowing wonderland. Long tables groaned under platters of food as families gathered to feast and celebrate. Stories flowed as freely as coffee and cider. Old-timers recalled their own weddings, children begged for tales of frontier days, and laughter punctuated every conversation. Jonas's fiddle sang sweetly as couples stepped onto the cleared floor to dance. Even the smallest children joined in, twirling between adults with unbridled enthusiasm. The warmth of fellowship and love filled every corner of the barn, pushing back memories of darker days. 5 new families had been created, bound together by faith, love, and the strength of community. Spring crept into the valley like a gentle awakening. The last patches of snow retreated from fence corners and shadowed hollows, surrendering to warming sunlight. Along the creek bank, tender green shoots pushed through dark soil, reaching towards the sky with determined vigor. In the newly tilled garden plots, the sisters, now settled into their roles as wives, worked side by side. Ruth's capable hands guided seedlings into neat rows, while Miriam spread straw between plants. Naomi, her eyes bright with purpose, carefully transplanted the herbs she had nurtured through winter on the windowsills. Rachel's quick movements made short work of weeding, and Esther marked rows with careful precision. The brothers moved through their own rhythms in the fields. Eli's plow cut clean furrows into rich earth, as Jonas and Abram followed with seed. Levi and Samuel mended fences where winter storms had worked mischief, their hammers ringing in the clear air. From the schoolroom set up in the converted barn loft, children's voices carried on the spring breeze. Esther's clear tones guided them through letters and numbers, patience warming her words. During breaks, their laughter scattered like bird song across the yard as they played beneath budding trees. Near the house, Naomi's sweet voice lifted in lullabies while she hung fresh washing on the line. The song drifted down to where the irrigation ditch ran strong and clear, its water rights now secured beyond question. The precious flow sustained their land just as it had nourished those who came before. Each Sunday brought neighbors from miles around, wagons rolling into the yard as families gathered for worship. The barn, swept clean and set with benches, filled with voices raised in hymns of gratitude. Sunlight streamed through high windows, touching bowed heads with gold as prayers rose like incense. Henry Gray, Hawk's visits became welcome occasions for sharing wisdom. The Ute elder would sit on the porch, his weathered hands gesturing as he spoke of seasons past and seasons to come. "Those who hold land with love hold it rightly," he would say, his eyes crinkling with approval at the care shown to every plant and creature. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in deep purple and rose, the families gathered on the wide porch. Lanterns cast warm circles of light as moths danced in their glow. Eli's deep voice carried clearly as he read from the family Bible, the ancient words of comfort and promise, falling like gentle rain on attentive ears. Ruth leaned against the porch post beside him, her face peaceful in the lamplight. Around them, their siblings sat close to their chosen partners, Abram with Miriam, Jonas near Esther, Levi beside Rachel, and Samuel sharing a blanket with Naomi. The contentment of hard-won peace showed in every relaxed shoulder and gentle smile. Above them, stars began to pierce the darkening sky, blazing with impossible clarity in the clean mountain air. The valley spread below, secure at last, fields ready for planting, gardens taking shape, the creek singing its endless song. What had begun in solitude and uncertainty had grown into something far richer, a household bound by faith, strengthened by love, and sustained by hope that would endure through generations to come. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.